The wind howled through the desolate ranch as Jacob stepped out onto the porch, the creak of the weatherwood beneath his boots breaking the silence. In the distance, a lone chestnut Mustang stood motionless, its dark eyes locked onto him as if it carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Jacob's breath hitched. It had been 20 years since Ash vanished into the wild, leaving behind only memories and unanswered questions. But now, under the crimson glow of dusk, the horse had returned. Why now? Jacob's heart raced as he took a step forward. Some bonds never break. Under the vast, open sky of Montana, a Mustang galloped freely, unaware of the man who once raised him with love and care. 2 decades had passed, and their bond seemed lost to time. Yet fate had a way of reuniting what once seemed forgotten. When their paths crossed again, something extraordinary unfolded, a recognition so immediate and profound it could take one's breath away. This is a story about the unbreakable power of love and memory. Jacob Alden squinted into the horizon, the rolling plain stretching endlessly before him. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dry grass and wild sage. As he stepped onto the unfamiliar ranch, a flood of memories stirred within him. Years ago, he had sold his family ranch due to financial struggles, leaving behind the land and the horses he had spent his life raising. Among those horses was a spirited chestnut Mustang named Ash. To Jacob, Ash had been more than an animal. He was a partner, a living symbol of the freedom Jacob cherished. The day Ash was sold at auction had left a deep scar, one Jacob had tried to forget but never could. Now, 20 years later, he found himself on this ranch, responding to the invitation of an old friend, Mike. The rancher had extended an offer to tour the property and discuss a project involving wild Mustang rehabilitation. Though uncertain if he was ready to confront the remnants of his past, Jacob had felt an inexplicable pull, a force he couldn't ignore. As he walked toward the corral, his boots crunching against the dry dirt, Jacob noticed a group of horses grazing near the fence line. Their varied colors, bay, black, gray, were beautiful, but one stood out. A chestnut Mustang lingered slightly apart, its mane tousled by the wind. Jacob froze mid-step, his breath catching. There was something hauntingly familiar about the way the horse moved, the way it carried itself. His heart raced as years melted away and memories surged forward. Could it be? Mike's cheerful voice broke Jacob's trance. The older man waved from the barn, a broad grin on his face. Jacob forced a smile as he approached, clasping his friend's hand. "Good to see you, Mike," he said. "You too. Been a long time," Mike replied, gesturing toward the horses. "Got some beauties out there, huh?" Jacob hesitated, glancing back at the chestnut Mustang. "Yeah," he said softly. "One of them reminds me of someone I used to know." Mike chuckled. "They have a way of doing that. Come on, let me show you around." As they toured the ranch, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that the chestnut Mustang was watching him. Every so often, he'd catch a glimpse of the horse standing still, its dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that sent shivers down his spine. "Hey, Mike," Jacob said as they walked past the corral. "What's the story with that chestnut out there?" Mike scratched his head. "That one came to us about a year ago. Picked him up at an auction. Wild as they come. Took us months just to get a halter on him." Jacob's breath caught. "Auction?" he echoed, his mind racing. "Yeah," Mike confirmed. "Why? Think you've seen him before." Jacob didn't answer immediately. His heart pounded as he turned back to the horse. It couldn't be, could it? Drawn by an overwhelming urge, Jacob walked toward the corral. The chestnut Mustang lifted its head, ears pricking forward. Jacob stopped a few feet from the fence, gripping the wooden rail. "Hey there, boy," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. The Mustang stepped closer, its movements cautious yet deliberate. Jacob's chest tightened as the horse approached, stopping just a few feet away. They stood there, staring at each other, as if time itself had paused. Then, breaking some unseen barrier, The Mustang stretched its neck forward, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air around Jacob. "Ash," Jacob whispered, his voice trembling. The Mustang's ears flicked at the sound of its name. It took another step forward, its dark eyes locking onto Jacob's. The recognition was immediate, undeniable. Jacob felt tears welling in his eyes as the horse pressed its muzzle against his outstretched hand. "Oh, Ash," Jacob choked out, his voice breaking. "It's really you." Jacob's hand trembled as he stroked the Mustang's muzzle, the warmth of the horse's breath anchoring him in the moment. Ash, the fiery chestnut Mustang he had raised from a foal, now stood before him after 2 decades. The odds of this reunion felt insurmountable, yet the connection between them was undeniable. Mike, watching cautiously from a distance, approached with curiosity. "Jacob, you all right?" he asked. Jacob didn't look away from Ash, his voice low and filled with awe. "This is Ash, my Ash. I raised him, sold him when I lost the ranch." Mike's brow furrowed with disbelief. "You're telling me this horse is the same one you had 2 decades ago?" Jacob nodded, his fingers brushing the soft fur along Ash's neck. "I'd recognize him anywhere. That blaze on his forehead, the way he moves. It's him." Mike crossed his arms, his skepticism softening as he observed. Ash, typically wary of strangers, stood calm and still, as though he too remembered Jacob. "Well, I'll be damned," Mike muttered. "I've never seen him act like this with anyone." Jacob couldn't pull himself away, memories flooding back. Training Ash as a colt, long rides across the open fields, the bond they had shared. He also remembered the auction, the gut-wrenching moment he had to let Ash go, and the guilt that had haunted him since. "Mike," Jacob said, his voice steady but resolute, "I need to spend some time with him." Mike nodded. "Take all the time you need. I'll be in the barn if you need me." As Mike walked away, Jacob stepped closer to Ash, unhooking the latch on the corral gate. The Mustang didn't flinch, his dark eyes tracking Jacob's every move. "You've grown into a fine horse," Jacob murmured, his voice filled with emotion. "I never stopped thinking about you." Ash nickered softly, his ears flicking back and forth as if listening. Jacob chuckled, wiping a tear from his cheek. "Still the same Ash I knew, always listening, always understanding." Jacob spent the afternoon with Ash, leading him out to the pasture and walking alongside him as he grazed. The Mustang moved fluidly and confidently, but Jacob noticed subtle signs of wear, faint scars on his legs, a stiffness in his gait. "What have you been through?" Jacob murmured, his heart aching for the years they'd been apart. Ash lifted his head, ears swiveling toward Jacob's voice. His gaze held a depth that spoke volumes without words. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the plains in hues of orange and pink, Mike returned. "You too look like you picked up right where you left off," he said, leaning against the fence. Jacob nodded, his hand resting on Ash's neck. "It's like no time has passed, but I can't help wondering, what's his story? How did he end up here?" Mike rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "When we got him at the auction, he was in rough shape. Malnourished, skittish, didn't trust anyone. Took us months to get close enough to handle him." Jacob's jaw tightened at the thought of Ash suffering. The idea of his beloved horse being mistreated and passed around was almost too much to bear. But as Jacob looked at Ash, standing strong against the setting sun, he felt a surge of resolve. "It doesn't matter where he's been," he said quietly. "What matters is that he's here now, and I'm not letting him go again." Mike smiled, clapping Jacob on the shoulder. "Looks like fate had a hand in this one. You two were meant to find each other again." Jacob nodded, his eyes never leaving Ash. "Yeah," he said with conviction. "We were." The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a golden glow on the ranch. Jacob stood by the corral, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. Ash stood by the fence, his chestnut coat gleaming in the morning light. "Morning, Ash," Jacob said softly. The horse nickered in response, his ears flicking forward. The bond they had shared years ago was still there, but Jacob knew it would take time to rebuild the trust fully. Later that morning, Mike found Jacob brushing Ash's coat in the paddock. The Mustang stood still, his muscles relaxed under Jacob's steady hand. "You've got away with him," Mike said, leaning against the gate. Jacob smiled, his movements gentle. "It's like he remembers everything. The trust, the routine, it's all still there." Mike nodded. "That's rare. Horses usually take time to warm up, even to familiar faces. But him? He's different." Jacob chuckled. He always was. Determined to reconnect fully, Jacob decided to take Ash for a walk around the ranch. Fastening a halter and lead rope, he spoke to the Mustang in low, soothing tones. "Let's see what you've got, old friend." Ash followed willingly, his steps confident but cautious. The ranch stretched out before them, its fields dotted with wildflowers and swaying grasses. Jacob marveled at how easily Ash fell into step beside him, as if no time had passed. "You haven't lost your stride," Jacob said, glancing at the horse. "Still the same strong, stubborn Ash I remember." The Mustang tossed his head, snorting as if in agreement. As they walked, Jacob's thoughts drifted to the past. The first time he saw Ash, a gangly colt with untamed energy. The countless hours spent building a bond that went beyond commands. Losing the ranch had been devastating, but losing Ash had broken something deep inside him. Now, with the Mustang by his side once more, Jacob felt a sense of wholeness he hadn't known in years. By the time they returned to the paddock, Ash seemed more at ease, his body language relaxed. Jacob removed the halter and let him roam freely. "You've still got it, boy," he said, leaning against the fence. Mike joined him, handing him a cold bottle of water. "You planning on sticking around a while?" Jacob nodded. "I think I have to. I can't walk away from him again." Mike smiled. "Figured you'd say that. There's a cabin out back. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it." Gratitude shone in Jacob's eyes. "Thanks, Mike. That means a lot." That evening, Jacob sat outside the small cabin, watching Ash graze. The days passed in a steady rhythm, each morning beginning with fresh feed and quiet moments in the paddock. Slowly but surely, the trust and bond they had once shared began to rebuild, stronger than ever. Jacob spent his days with Ash as though no time had passed between them, each interaction drawing them closer. Ash thrived under Jacob's care, his chestnut coat glowing with health, and his muscles regaining their former strength. Yet Jacob knew their bond wouldn't be fully rekindled until they shared one defining experience, riding together again. On a cool, crisp morning, Jacob approached Ash's paddock with a saddle and bridle in hand. Ash, grazing near the fence, lifted his head at the sight of the equipment. His nostrils flared slightly, but he stayed calm. Jacob smiled, his voice gentle. "You remember this, don't you?" He placed the saddle on the fence and took his time grooming Ash, speaking in soothing tones. "We've done this before, buddy. If you're not ready, that's okay. We'll go at your pace." When Jacob placed the saddle on Ash's back, he moved slowly, letting the horse adjust. Ash shifted slightly but didn't pull away, a testament to the trust they had rebuilt. Jacob secured the saddle and spoke softly. "That's my boy, just like old times." Mike watched from a distance, leaning against the barn door with a coffee cup in hand. "You really think he'll let you ride?" he called out. Jacob glanced back with a faint smile. Only one way to find out. He led Ash to the center of the paddock, speaking softly while adjusting the bridle. Ash followed willingly, his movements confident. Jacob took a deep breath, placed a foot in the stirrup, and swung into the saddle. Ash shifted his weight, but didn't resist. Jacob sat still, giving the Mustang a moment to adjust to the familiar presence on his back. "You've still got it," Jacob said softly, patting Ash's neck. With a gentle nudge, Jacob urged Ash forward. The Mustang responded smoothly, his gait steady as they moved around the paddock. Memories flooded Jacob's mind. Long rides across open fields, quiet moments under the stars, and the bond that had made them inseparable. After a while, Jacob brought Ash to a stop and dismounted, removing the saddle and bridle to let him roam freely. "You've still got the spirit," Jacob said, leaning against the fence. Mike approached, shaking his head in amazement. "I've seen a lot of horsemen, but what you've got with him, it's something else." Jacob smiled, his eyes never leaving Ash. "He's family. Always has been." In the weeks that followed, Jacob and Ash settled into a rhythm, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Ash regained his strength and spirit, moving with the grace and confidence Jacob remembered. But Jacob knew there was one more step to take, a test of trust that would take them beyond the safety of the ranch. They needed to ride together into the open plains, where Ash had once run wild. On a clear morning, Jacob prepared for the journey. He packed a small saddlebag with water, snacks, and a first aid kit, securing it on Ash's saddle. "Today's the day," he said softly, stroking Ash's neck. The Mustang nickered in response, his ears flicking toward Jacob's voice. Mike appeared by the paddock gate, holding a thermos of coffee. "You sure about this?" he asked, his voice edged with concern. Jacob nodded, his hand resting firmly on Ash. "It's time. We need this, for both of us." Mike sighed, handing him the thermos. "Good luck. You two are a hell of a team. Just be careful out there." As they set off, the ranch disappeared behind them, replaced by rolling hills and endless stretches of grassland. Jacob let Ash set the pace, marveling at how easily the Mustang navigated the terrain. His movements were smooth and deliberate, his ears alert to every sound. "This is where you belong," Jacob said softly, his words carried by the wind. "Out here, where you can be free." They rode for hours, the rhythm of Ash's hooves blending with the sounds of the plains. Jacob felt a deep sense of peace, as if the years of separation had finally been erased. When the sun reached its zenith, Jacob guided Ash to a small stream, where they paused to rest. Ash drank deeply, his chestnut coat gleaming in the sunlight. Jacob knelt by the water, running his fingers through the cool current, his thoughts drifting. "You've been through so much," he murmured, glancing at Ash. "But you've come through stronger, just like always." The Mustang lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting Jacob's. In that moment, Jacob felt an unspoken understanding pass between them, a bond that transcended words and time. They had found each other again, and nothing would break them apart. As they rode back toward the ranch, the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the plains in hues of orange and pink. Jacob felt a renewed sense of purpose, his heart full. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. Jacob guided Ash to a shaded area beneath a cluster of trees and dismounted, allowing the Mustang to drink and graze. Leaning against a fallen log, Jacob let the tranquility of the moment wash over him. The gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, and for a brief moment he closed his eyes, savoring the stillness. But the peace didn't last long. A distant rumble caught his attention, growing louder with each second. Jacob's eyes snapped open, scanning the horizon. A herd of wild mustangs was galloping toward them, their movements powerful and graceful. Ash lifted his head, ears pricking forward, his posture alert. Jacob's chest tightened as he watched Ash take a step toward the herd, the longing in the Mustang's eyes unmistakable, a pull toward the freedom he once knew. Jacob remained still, his heart heavy. He had always known this moment might come and had tried to prepare himself for it. In the following days, Jacob felt a calm he hadn't experienced in years. Each moment with Ash seemed to reaffirm the bond they had rebuilt. The Mustang followed him around the ranch, his dark eyes filled with trust and curiosity. To Jacob, it was as though Ash had never left his side. One crisp morning, Jacob decided it was time to introduce Ash to more of the ranch. Though the property was vast, Ash hadn't explored all of it. Jacob led him to an open pasture stretching for miles, bordered by a quiet creek and clusters of cottonwood trees. Gesturing to the expanse, Jacob said, "This is where we're going to build something new. A place where you can run free, just like the old days." Ash nickered softly, his ears flicking forward. Jacob smiled, patting his neck. "Let's see what you've got, boy." Releasing the lead rope, Jacob stepped back to give Ash room. For a moment, the Mustang hesitated, nostrils flaring as he took in his surroundings. Then, with a powerful kick, Ash bolted forward, his chestnut coat gleaming in the sunlight. Jacob stood in awe, watching Ash gallop across the field, his strides fluid and strong. The Mustang's mane and tail flowed like ribbons in the wind, a breathtaking display of freedom and power. It was a sight Jacob had longed to see, a reminder of why he had fallen in love with the ranching life. Mike approached, standing beside Jacob. "He's something else," Mike said, his voice tinged with admiration. Jacob nodded, pride evident in his tone. "He always has been." As Ash slowed to a trot and returned to Jacob's side, an idea began to form. "Mike," Jacob said, turning to his friend, "what if we made this place a sanctuary, a safe haven for other horses like Ash? Wild, wanted, or forgotten?" Mike raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You mean like a Mustang rescue?" "Exactly," Jacob replied, his excitement building. "There are so many out there who need a second chance. We've got the space, the resources, and Ash could be the one to show them the way." They built additional paddocks, repaired old fencing, and reached out to local organizations to learn more about Mustang rescues. Ash became the heart of the project, his story inspiring everyone who heard it. People from neighboring towns visited the ranch, bringing supplies and offering their help. Jacob was overwhelmed by the support, but his greatest joy came from watching Ash thrive in his new role. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob sat on the porch, gazing out at the pasture. Ash stood in the distance, his silhouette framed by the golden light, a symbol of resilience and freedom. Jacob's heart swelled with gratitude. Together, they had not only reclaimed their bond, but also created something that could make a difference for others. Jacob sat on the porch of his cabin, gazing out at the pasture where Ash grazed peacefully. The Mustang lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting Jacob's from across the field. "You've come a long way, boy," Jacob said softly, his voice carrying a note of gratitude. "And so have I." Ash nickered in response, his ears flicking forward as if he understood. Jacob smiled, a deep sense of contentment washing over him. The sanctuary officially opened a few months later, welcoming its first residents from various rescues and auctions. Jacob watched as Ash greeted the newcomers, his presence calm and reassuring. It was as though the Mustang instinctively understood his role, stepping into it with the same grace and strength he had always shown. As Jacob leaned against the fence, watching the horses roam, Mike joined him. "You've built something incredible here," Mike said, his tone filled with admiration. Jacob nodded, his gaze never leaving Ash. "I didn't do it alone. He showed me the way." That night, as Jacob sat by the fire, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the pain of losing Ash to the joy of finding him again, every step had led him here. A life filled with purpose, surrounded by the animals he loved. Ash had not only given Jacob a second chance at happiness, but had also inspired him to create a legacy that would endure for generations. Months turned into years, and the sanctuary thrived beyond Jacob's wildest dreams. The ranch became a haven for horses in need, a place where they could heal, grow, and rediscover their spirit. Word of the sanctuary spread far and wide, drawing visitors eager to witness the incredible transformations taking place. At the heart of it all was Ash, the chestnut Mustang who had become a symbol of resilience and hope. His presence brought comfort to every horse that arrived, his quiet strength guiding them toward trust and healing. One crisp autumn morning, Jacob stood by the paddock, watching as Ash led a small group of horses to the creek. The sunlight danced across the water, and Jacob felt a profound sense of peace. "He's your legacy," Mike said, walking up beside him. Jacob nodded, his voice steady. "And so is this place. It's not just about the horses. It's about the people they touch. Ash reminded me of that. As Ash lifted his head, his gaze met Jacob's from across the field. In that moment, Jacob knew they had come full circle. The bond they had shared had become the foundation for something far greater, a legacy of second chances and unbreakable connections. Ash's story reminds us that love and trust can overcome even the longest separations. If this story touched your heart, help spread the message of hope and second chances. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves inspiring tales of connection and resilience. Together, we can honor the spirit of animals like Ash and create a world where every life is given the second chance it deserves.